You're not underpaid. You're not unlucky. You're not being overlooked. You've been perfectly classified. You're the person they call when something breaks, the one they trust with the hardest problems, the one who stays late, delivers early, and never says no. Because hard work didn't fail you. It worked exactly as intended on you. Let's start with the story you were told. Work hard, show up, prove yourself, deliver results. And eventually you'll rise. That's the promise. And for a while it seems true. You work harder than everyone around you. You get noticed. You get trusted. You get more responsibility. But then something strange happens. The responsibility keeps growing, but the authority doesn't. You're managing more projects, but you're not in the room where priorities are set. You're solving bigger problems, but you're not deciding which problems matter. You're working longer hours, but the people who work less are the ones getting promoted, and you start to wonder what you did wrong. The answer is worse. You did everything right. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. You became valuable, dependable, essential. The moment you became indispensable, you stopped being promotable. Because hard work doesn't make you powerful. It makes you useful. And useful people don't get power. They get used. You've been rewarded with trust, but trust is not control. And once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it. If this is hitting close to home, like this video and subscribe. The hardest workers in every organization are also the least powerful. You weren't climbing, you were being placed. The promotion you're waiting for isn't delayed, it's strategically withheld. Because promoting you would solve your problem, but create theirs. Here's the distinction most people never make. Value is what you produce. Power is what you can refuse. Write this in the comments. My value is not my leverage. If you want the rest of the playbook, subscribe. Hard workers maximize value. They say yes, they deliver, they prove they can handle more. But every time you say yes, you lose leverage. Because leverage isn't about how much you do. It's about how much friction your absence would cause. The most powerful people do less, respond slower, and prove nothing. And somehow, that makes them more influential. Why? Because they've made themselves scarce. Hard workers make themselves abundant, available, eager. Power belongs to whoever can afford absence. The person who can say no and make it stick has more power than the person who can do everything. The person who delays a response has more power than the person who replies in minutes. The person whose absence disrupts the system has more power than the person whose presence keeps it running. You were taught that value equals power. But value without scarcity is just productivity. And productivity makes you useful, not untouchable. Here's what nobody tells you. The marketplace doesn't reward the hardest worker. It rewards the scarcest resource. And you've been training yourself to be abundant when you should have been engineering scarcity. Every extra hour you work, every extra project you accept, every immediate response you send, it all broadcasts the same message. I have capacity. I'm available. I'm not in demand elsewhere. And that message destroys your negotiating position before you even enter the room. Machiavelli understood something most people spend their entire careers missing. Power is not a reward for effort. It's a consequence of position.
You don't earn power by working harder. You assume it by making others dependent on your decisions, not your output.
The prince isn't a manual for being liked. It's a manual for being necessary in a way that can't be easily replaced. And here's the key insight. Hard work makes you replaceable, in a specific way. It proves the role can be done. You become the blueprint, the standard, the proof of concept. But power comes from being structurally difficult to bypass. Not because you're doing more, but because removing you would require renegotiating too many relationships, restructuring too many workflows, or risking too much uncertainty. You increased your functional value and erased your political leverage. You've made yourself necessary to operations. But power doesn't come from operations. It comes from direction. The person who decides what gets built has more power than the person who builds it. The person who controls access has more power than the person who delivers quality. The person who shapes the agenda has more power than the person who executes it perfectly. Hard work makes others dependent on your labor. Power makes others dependent on your approval. And that's not the same thing. Machiavelli understood this cleanly. Power comes from being structurally unavoidable, not personally impressive. The modern equivalent isn't about moral manipulation. It's about strategic positioning. It's about understanding that organizations are networks of dependency, and power flows to the nodes that others must route through, not the nodes that process the most volume. Here's the trap nobody warns you about. The better you perform in a role, the harder it becomes to leave it. You deliver results, you get praised, you get more responsibility, and then quietly, invisibly, you get locked in. Not because you're bad at your job, because you're too good at it. Think about it. If you're the person who always delivers, why would anyone promote you into a role where you'd have to learn new skills, move slower, and produce less measurable output? It's safer for them to keep you where you are. You're operationally indispensable, but politically irrelevant. You've become a high-functioning component, critical to the system, impossible to remove without friction. But components don't make decisions. They execute them. And the cruel irony is this: the more efficient you become, the less freedom you have. Your competence becomes your ceiling. You're too valuable to promote and too embedded to leave without consequence. You're rewarded for doing more, which trains you to believe that doing even more will unlock the next level. But the next level isn't about doing more. It's about deciding what gets done. And you'll never get access to that power by proving you can execute faster. You'll get it by proving that things don't move without you. Not because you're working, but because you're choosing. Productivity makes you feel successful while keeping you subordinate. You hit your metrics. You exceed expectations. You get bonuses, recognition, awards. But none of that is power. That's compensation for accepting your position in the hierarchy. You're being paid well to stay exactly where you are. And the payment feels like progress, so you don't notice that you're not moving up. You're just getting more comfortable in your cage. You've become the person who handles X. Identities don't get promoted, positions do. And the better you handle it, the more that becomes your entire identity in the organization. And identity is incredibly hard to escape. Here's the shift that changes everything. You're not being overlooked, you're being preserved, because moving you would cause problems, replacing you would take time, promoting you would create a gap. And so, you stay. Not because you're not good enough, because you're too useful where you are. Power doesn't promote the most valuable person. It promotes the person whose removal would cause the least disruption to the people already in power. You're valued, trusted, depended on, but dependency flows away from you, not toward you. You need the approval of others to act. They need your output to succeed. And that asymmetry is the entire game. You're working harder to prove you're ready for the next level. But the next level doesn't go to people who prove they can work. It goes to people who prove that others need their permission. Hard workers are protected in place. Powerful people are moved into position, and once you see that difference, you realize you weren't failing to get promoted. You were succeeding at being contained. Let's talk about speed. Hard workers respond fast. They're available. They reply within minutes. They finish ahead of schedule. And every time they do, they signal something. I'm ready. I'm waiting. I'm here for you. Now watch what powerful people do. They delay, not because they're rude, not because they're inefficient, because delay is a power move. When you respond immediately, you show that you were waiting, that you're available, that you're not in demand. When you delay, even slightly, you show that other things came first, that your time is contested, that access to you is not automatic. This is why executives take days to reply to emails that take 30 seconds to write. It's not about the content. It's about the signal. I wasn't waiting for you. You were waiting for me. Speed reveals who is waiting. Waiting reveals who is subordinate. The faster you respond, the clearer your position becomes. And it's never the higher waters. Hard workers optimize for speed. Powerful people optimize for position. And speed is a positional tell. It shows who's serving and who's being served. Send this to one person who keeps saying yes and keeps getting bypassed. You were taught that responsiveness is professionalism, and it is for people whose job is to serve. But power doesn't serve. It decides, and decisions don't require speed. They require weight. The slower you move, the more serious your time appears. The more serious your time appears, the more valuable your attention becomes. And attention is the currency of power. There's a reason why the most powerful people have assistants who manage their calendars and screen their communications. It's not just convenience. It's a structural barrier that enforces scarcity. Every layer between you and them is a reminder that access is controlled, limited, valuable. You don't need an assistant to do this. You just need to stop responding like you're available. Stop treating every request as urgent. Stop acting like your time is abundant. Because the moment you act scarce, people start treating you like you're scarce. And scarcity is how you signal that you belong at a different level. Here's something you've probably noticed but never named. The most powerful people in any organization look like they're doing less. Fewer emails, fewer meetings, fewer visible tasks. Meanwhile, the hardest workers look like they're drowning. Notifications everywhere, calendars packed, always in motion, and somehow the person doing less has more influence. Why? Because execution is visible. Decision-making is not. Hard workers execute decisions. That's measurable, visible, impressive. But powerful people shape which decisions exist in the first place. They're not in every meeting. They're in the one meeting that determines which other meetings happen. They're not responding to every email. They're deciding which emails require a response. They're not working on every project. They're choosing which projects get resources. Execution scales with effort. You do more, you produce more. But influence scales with position. You don't need to do more. You need to be in the right place when the decision is being made. And that's why powerful people rarely look busy. They're not optimizing for output. They're optimizing for presence in the moments that matter. Hard workers are everywhere, all the time. Powerful people are in one place, at the right time. And that concentrated presence is worth more than distributed effort. Think about a board meeting that lasts 2 hours. The CEO might speak for 15 minutes total. But those 15 minutes determine the direction of thousands of hours of work by hundreds of people. That's leverage. The hard worker puts in 60-hour weeks executing the strategy. The powerful person spends 15 minutes shaping what the strategy is. Same organization, wildly different leverage. And the tragic part is that hard workers see powerful people's calendars and think they're barely working. They don't understand that those empty blocks aren't laziness. They're the space required to think strategically, to make considered decisions, to be unavailable for execution so they can focus on direction. Busyness is a trap. It makes you feel productive while ensuring you never have the space to become powerful. So here's the choice. You can be useful, valued, liked, dependable. Or you can be powerful, but you probably can't be both. Because power requires distance, refusal, boundaries. Power requires disappointing people who benefit from your availability, and those things make you less warm, less available, less easy to work with. Hard workers are loved because they make other people's lives easier. Powerful people are respected because they make their own priorities non-negotiable. And most people can't make that shift. Because it feels wrong. It feels selfish to say no. It feels lazy to do less. It feels cold to delay a response. And so they stay useful. They stay busy. They stay stuck. But power doesn't care about your feelings. It cares about structure. And the structure is simple. If your presence is guaranteed, you have no leverage. If your effort is abundant, you have no scarcity. If your approval is automatic, you have no authority.
Power isn't about being the best. It's about being the hardest to bypass. Not because you're difficult, but because bypassing you would require too much renegotiation.
You don't need to be liked. You need to be necessary in a way that can't be easily transferred. And that shift, from useful to untouchable, requires you to become someone you were taught not to be. Less eager, less available, less willing to prove yourself. It feels uncomfortable. It feels wrong. But discomfort is the price of leverage. And leverage is the only thing that turns value into power. This identity shift is where most people fail, because it requires you to tolerate other people's disappointment. It requires you to be okay with someone thinking you're not a team player. It requires you to prioritize your strategic position over your immediate likability. And if you are raised to be helpful, to be kind, to be accommodating, this feels like betraying your values. But here's the reframe. You can't help people from a position of powerlessness. You can't create change if you're stuck executing someone else's vision. You can't make a real impact if you're too busy being useful to be influential. Sometimes the most strategic thing you can do is become less helpful in the short term, so you can become more powerful in the long term. And that requires an identity shift that most people never make. So what does this look like in practice? It's not about working less. It's about working differently. Stop maximizing output. Start managing access. Stop saying yes to everything. Start making people explain why your time is worth it. Stop proving you can do more. Start proving that things don't move without your input. Here's the shift. Hard workers ask, what can I take on? Powerful people ask, what requires my decision? Hard workers optimize their calendar for productivity. Powerful people optimize their calendar for leverage. Hard workers want to be included in everything. Powerful people decide what's worth including themselves in. The goal is not to do less out of laziness. The goal is to make your participation non-automatic. When your presence is expected, it's not valued. When your absence creates friction, it's powerful. Think about it. Who has more power? The person who's in every meeting or the person whose absence delays the meeting? Who has more leverage? The person who replies instantly or the person whose reply everyone's waiting for? Who has more influence? The person who does everything or the person who decides what gets done? Scarcity creates leverage. Leverage creates negotiating power. And negotiating power is what separates the hard worker from the decision maker. You don't need to work harder. You need to work in a way that makes your approval required, not just your effort. And that only happens when you become strategically scarce. Here's a practical example. Stop attending meetings where your role is to execute decisions that have already been made. Only attend meetings where your input shapes what decision gets made. If you're just there to receive information, you're in the wrong meeting. Here's another. Stop responding to requests the same day they arrive. Add a 24-hour buffer, see what happens. Most requests will either resolve themselves or prove they weren't actually urgent. And the ones that persist, those are the ones worth your time. Here's a third. Start saying, "Let me think about that and get back to you," instead of immediately agreeing. Even if you know you'll say yes, the pause creates space. It signals that your agreement isn't automatic, that your yes has weight. These aren't games. They're structural changes that shift how people perceive your availability, your scarcity, and your power. And perception creates reality. If you're done being useful, subscribe. And comment one thing you're going to stop doing this week to become scarce. Here's the final truth. Power is not a reward for effort. It's assumed by people who stop proving themselves. You are taught that if you work hard enough, power would be granted to you. But power is never granted. It's taken quietly, slowly, by people who understand that authority comes from position, not production. Hard work makes you valuable to the system. Power makes the system adjust to you. And once you see that distinction, you can't unsee it. You start noticing who's working and who's deciding, who's responding and who's being waited on, who's proving themselves and who's already assumed they belong. Hard work is not noble, it's a signal. And the signal is, I'm available, I'm eager, I'm trying to earn something. But power doesn't earn. It occupies. It doesn't ask for permission. It makes others ask. It doesn't increase output. It controls direction. It doesn't work harder. It works from a position where effort is no longer the variable that matters. You've been working hard your entire life, and maybe that's made you good at what you do. But it hasn't made you powerful, because power was never about effort. It was always about leverage, and leverage comes from one thing, making others need your approval more than you need theirs. So here's the question you need to ask yourself. Are you working to prove your value? Or are you positioning yourself so that your value is assumed and your absence is unacceptable? Because one makes you useful, and the other makes you powerful, and they are not the same thing. The hardest part of this realization is accepting that everything you were taught about success was designed to produce workers, not leaders, producers, not decision-makers, people who add value, not people who control it. And there's nothing wrong with being a hard worker unless you want power. Because the skills that make you excellent at execution are often the opposite of the skills that create authority. Execution requires responsiveness. Authority requires restraint. Execution rewards volume. Authority rewards selectivity. Execution proves capability. Authority assumes it. You can't become powerful by being better at the things that made you useful. You have to become different. You have to become someone who understands that work is not the path to power. Position is. And position isn't earned through effort. It's secured through leverage, scarcity, and the strategic management of dependency. The system doesn't want you to know this, because the system needs hard workers. It needs people who believe that effort equals advancement. It needs people who will keep producing while waiting for a promotion that never comes. But now you know. As long as you're busy proving value, someone else will decide where it's used. Power was never about effort. It was always about leverage. Are you going to keep working hard, or are you going to start building leverage? If you're choosing leverage, subscribe, like, and share. If this made you uncomfortable, because discomfort is usually the truth arriving.